Hello and welcome to our YouTube channel, RV Tips from Jan. Today's topic, some common sense camping rules that will make us all better campers. There are a number of great videos on YouTube on this subject. Many of them are titled The Unwritten Rules for Campers or The Unwritten Rules for RVers. Well, I'm going to take a stab at this subject myself and add a couple other new thoughts that you may find interesting and hopefully thought-provoking. So let's get started. The number one rule that my wife and I try to adhere to when we're out with our RV at the various campsites is be a good neighbor. And this covers a lot of different activities with regard to how we conduct ourselves at our individual campsites. But if we keep this top of mind, everything else sort of falls into place behind this. Number two, we've all heard this one, don't walk through other campsites. The other camper's site is their own individual, if you will, territory. They could have a pet, but whether they have a pet or not, it really is rude to cut through their campsite to get from point A to point B. Even if it means walking around on the roadway, for example, to get to the bathhouse, that's the courteous thing to do versus cutting through someone else's campsite to take a shortcut. We should be turning off our outside bright lights at dusk. These can be very annoying to the campsite on either side of us or in front or in back of us. And at night, it's best just to turn those off so that they are not bothersome to the next camper. Some campers like to open their blinds and windows at night to get some fresh air. And if we have a lot of bright light coming in, that can be very annoying. This is an obvious one, but one that we sometimes need to be reminded of. And in fact, this last weekend, when we were at Potato Creek State Park in Indiana, we had a large group that was a couple campsites over from us that really violated this particular rule. Keep your TVs and radios to an appropriate sound level. There was one individual in this group in particular. He had a great sound system, and he wanted the whole park to know that he had this wonderful sound system in his car. And he didn't just do it once or twice, but every time he jumped in the car, left the campsite, or came back to the campsite, this radio was blaring. And in fact, as he was pulling out of the park, we could still hear his radio in that car blaring going down the road. This is another obvious one, but sometimes we forget to do it. We'll take the pet for a quick walk, and we forget to bring the appropriate plastic bag to pick up the pet droppings. If that happens, make sure you get back to that spot just as quickly as possible. But even more appropriately, make sure that you've got the plastic bag or a couple plastic bags with you if you're going to take your pet for a walk. This is another one that we sometimes forget about. But if you damage or see damaged part equipment, it's best to really report it. And you do that so that, number one, problem can get addressed by the authorities. Number two, so that someone does not get injured or hurt. And then number three, if you damaged it, it's just good campground etiquette to report it and even offer to compensate the campground for the damage. They'll certainly appreciate the fact that you were courteous enough to alert them to that. Unfortunately, this is one that is becoming an increasingly challenging problem for all of us. As we have found these campgrounds to get more and more crowded, unfortunately, the thieves come out of the woodwork. And oftentimes, these are not necessarily people that are actually camping. They could be, quote, visitors to the campground. And if we leave out expensive equipment, such as our electric bikes, unsecured, it's just too tempting. Most of the parks have very strict rules about only burning certain types of logs in the various fire pits that they make available at the campsites. Oftentimes, not only do they warn you about doing that, but they could also fine you, and in the worst case situation, ask you to leave your site and tell you that you're not going to be invited back to be at that particular park. Number 9, we have 9 grandkids and we can really identify with this. Let the kids be kids. Let them burn off some steam. That's why they're there. So if you hear them yelling over on the swings or in the sandbox or on the teeter-totter, let them be kids. Now, you want them to be safe. So if you see something that's unsafe, it's certainly the prudent thing to do, just to gently remind them of that. But don't be an old Scrooge. And then finally, this is also common courtesy, but a lot of people don't do it. They're so anxious to get out, get on the road, get home. They forget this final step. But this really is a common courtesy to the next camper as well as to those who run and maintain the park. Also, if there's anything left in the fire pit, such as bottles, cans, anything that really shouldn't be in that fire pit, before you leave, pick those up, throw them in the trash bag, and make sure you drop that bag off at the dump. I hope you found this YouTube video to be useful. Admittedly, it's not all that innovative. In fact, most of these rules have been shared in other great videos on YouTube. The unwritten rule that my wife and I like best, though, is be a good neighbor, whether it's at the campsite or somewhere in the campground, whether it's dealing with other campers or dealing with officials. We have found that if we're respectful and treat others as good neighbors, that same treatment is returned to us. And that makes the experience so much more enjoyable for everyone. And after all, isn't that what camping and RVing is all about? I hope you agree, and I suspect that you do. Thanks again for watching. If this has been helpful, please check that subscription box. But most importantly, as we say at the end of all of our videos, please continue to be safe and stay well. Thanks again.